Okay, I'm going to introduce myself and then we're going to start talking about assessments for most of our time together. I'm going to go through some ideas way too fast. This is the kind of thing you could spend your whole life thinking about. Some of us do. And then I want to focus on two key points: reducing barriers and increasing challenge. And I'm going to throw a lot of examples at you, some from biology, where my home is, some from other fields with people that I've worked with, and then hopefully get your questions throughout. So I should start by introducing myself. I'm Ben Wiggins. So I'm from the University of Washington, and I teach and have taught a number of different courses. So my intro molecular courses are very large. My graduate student courses, where graduate students learn how to teach in ambitious and compassionate ways, are very small. And then I teach things like a senior lab course in what to do when the apocalypse hits. So that's civilizational biology. If anybody wants to know how to make fire or give birth, I can help. I have degrees, if you like degrees. And if you are interested in education research papers, I have a couple that you might be interested in there. And for those of you who are just here for the cute baby pictures, I have you covered as well. Let's start with problematizing what we're going to work on. I am going to give you an assessment in about 45 minutes. I'm going to test your knowledge based on what we have done. And here are the questions that I'm going to hit you with. So first, what is a step that you can take to reduce barriers for your students to do well on assessments? I want to know something that you can do in the short term, something you can do in the medium term, or something in the long term. I'm going to throw those at you because I think that we will cover lots of different options, something of which I hope will work for your situation. And secondly, I want you to take one of the methods that I'm going to give you as an example and make that work for your class to raise the challenge level and demand more of your students in a way that still works for your grading hours, that still works within the class, and pulls some of that innovation and excitement out of your students as well. Okay, let's start then with a poll for you. So I want to know a little bit about your experience. Online learning makes many of the most important things that we do more difficult, not impossible, but more difficult. So the poll is open now for you. Which of these are true from your experience? Online learning makes it more difficult for students to, I'll give you about 20 seconds. And Richard and Dane, I think you can see the poll. Love it.
We can.
Okay, I'm seeing answers starting to come in. Does anybody want more time on this? If you do, you can throw your hand up. The little blue hand that makes it look like a bunch of Smurfs want 20 more seconds. Great. I'm going to end it there. This was for participation only. And one of the things that I'm noticing is that many of us are saying that it's hard for students to care. It's hard for students to connect. It's hard for students to enjoy. And those are all emotional features of courses. We can deliver the content, no problem. But if what we really want to do is engage students' heads and engage their hearts, those things become more difficult. Something like 14% of people said that giving a compliment becomes more difficult. And you may not even understand as an instructor how often you give implicit compliments that really matter for students. That's harder to do on Zoom. Okay. So here's what we typically ask when we think about assessments. We ask, especially in March and April, how should I reformat my assessments to fit into this Zoom world? And that is a completely reasonable question. We also ask, how do we stop cheating? And it feels like cheating is more in our faces, is more ever present now that students are in their own rooms. But what we might ask is a more core question to that. How do we write great assessments? The kinds of things that we want to worry about the format, we want to worry about the online cheating, but we really want to do a great job of giving assessments. And the questions that really pull students into the field are things that we can think about with a deeper question. How do we align assignments with our learning goals in ways that do three things? We want those assessments to be memorable, not just another test, not just another quiz, but something that students think about after the class is over, something that affects their learning, changes their brain into the future. We want those to be inspirational, to make them want to do the work, that it's at the heart of higher education. And crucially, we all know that the state of the art when we got our education is not the state of the art now. We want these to advance critical creativity. And that looks different in everyone's different fields, but we want students who can become the next generation of professionals and practitioners that we're trying to train. So for all of these qualities, they tend to help with learning when things are memorable. They tend to decrease cheating. And I'm going to talk a lot about cheating as an antithesis to great assessments. And they tend to help humans grow. So we're looking to write assessments, to create assessments, to develop opportunities for assessments that do these three things. If you are still with me, let me throw some modeling at you. Why do students cheat? Here is the simple lens that if you talk to a politician or somebody from outside education, this is the kind of first order thinking that you generally get. So you have a student and they want to achieve an exam score. So they're going to do the work in your course and they're going to take some challenge honorably. That's a really simple model. And if they do it well or poorly, their exam score is going to vary based on the effort that they put in. Absent any other model, this is fine. It's just like every model we use in science, it's a lie in some way. And some students take a shortcut. So they cheat because they can't do the work, or they don't want to, or they don't have this idea of being willing to do an honorable challenge. Okay, here's our simple lens. And I think most of the nods that I'm seeing in the gallery view are telling me that, okay, we're not gonna hang our hat on this model. Here's a more sociocultural way of looking at the exact same question. So there's the simple model. And we're gonna layer some things on top of that. And the first is that cheating is only one of the bad pathways. In fact, in some ways it might be a good pathway because it's one that we can see. But students also leave the field. Students also protect themselves from true failure by not putting in their full effort, by not really applying themselves in new ways. Students also quit. Not just, and this is a problem, especially one we're very familiar with in biology, where students don't quit biology and go to other fields. They quit biology and they go home. So why do they go to these pathways? Well, the pathway of true honorable achievement is somehow blocked for them. And this blocker comes from biochemistry. So if you're not always thinking about digestive enzymes, now you know. One potential blocker is that the exam format is somehow not accessible to them. There's something that they can't read, they can't do, they can't follow, but that's just one of the potential blockers. They might not feel like the kind of person who can succeed on your assessment. They don't have the identity yet. They may be stopped purely because of literacy tools. If the exam is unreadable in some way, even in ways that they might not understand, it might not be a conscious thing, that can feel like a barrier towards achieving on their assessment. They can worry about other students cheating. That can be a major stopper for students. And for many of our students in science, the day of each assessment is a risk that that is their last chance. That failure is going to start a cascade directly out of science. And I am using science broadly here because in every study, we know that students at some level can feel this. These ancient Chinese characters are to remind me that Sun Tzu said that if you really want to fight an enemy and you really want them to go down one path, make it really easy to go down that path. And so removing these barriers is a big point for us to trying to get students out of the bailing, out of the failing, out of the pulling back their full effort. So what I just told you is most students have challenges outside of the course that prevent their full effort. And these are directly tied to how they do on assessments. Most students who cannot overcome those challenges, they don't cheat. They often do things that are worse. In fact, if we could go back and rewind the tape a few years, there are probably some students that have cheated in our courses that we would have said, oh, good, because otherwise they would have just left. Otherwise they would have given up. It's weird to think of cheating as possibly not the worst option. And most of the pressure on students comes from their perceptions. And especially perceptions for students are often mediated by the instructor. You decide, sorry, that's a bad way of saying it. You have a major part to play in how students feel about their pressure. Not how much they are actually under pressure, but how they feel about it. And so you can mediate some of these barriers. And mediating these things is always more difficult in an online situation. The little smile or nod at the corner of the classroom as they're leaving, or the little acknowledgement of a person's place and right to exist in your field, those are harder to do staring at a screen. Okay. I've presented a sociocultural model for cheating that we're going to use to think about barriers. And what I want to do is I want to pause here and see if we have questions. And then I want to test you on this. So I am happy to take questions. Either you can throw up your Smurf hand or you can put them in the chat. Let me take about 10 seconds and see what comes through. I actually do normally count the 10 seconds out verbally. One question coming in saying, am I saying that it is bad to fail? I am using the higher education language of failing as not getting credit, not being allowed to go into a major, a full stop. Clearly, lower stakes, temporary, partial failures where we learn what we don't know, those are a good thing. I completely agree. But when a student can't go into their field or they can't graduate, I think that if we're taking talented students and then later saying you can't be a talented person, we're doing something wrong there. Thank you, Payman, for that question. Okay, so now I get to test you. So here's the model that we just looked at. And let's say a hypothetical software can monitor everything that a student's doing, and it takes over their laptop. So while they're taking an assessment. So once CyberTest has control of the machine, it logs their eye movements, it logs their face, it helps to prevent cheating in a number of different ways. So we've got a big cross through the cheating line because CyberTest is going to stop cheating for us. My questions for you are, if we take a sociocultural lens on cheating, how does that predict that CyberTest could even make student outcomes worse overall and maybe even increase cheating? That's one question for you. I don't want you to answer yet. And I also want you to think about, why does this model predict that we will never prevent all cheating? Now, if this were my classroom and 300 or 800 of you were in the same room, we could break into small groups, we could talk as a main group. There's lots of different ways that we could go through this. But the thing that I want to do is I want to give you about 5 minutes in a breakout room to work on these 2 questions. I'm also going to put up the notes one last time for people that just got here. As you go into breakout rooms, somebody will probably want to have these notes because they have the questions on them. About 5 minutes, and then I'll pull you back and we'll discuss the answers to those 2 questions. So let's assign people into about 8 per room. Not everybody will be able to participate based on bandwidth. Do your best for 5 minutes or so, and then I'll call you back. If you have any problems with the room, just let me know, and I'll be here to help. When it works, it feels so smooth. Oh, these are great questions. I'm going to record some of these questions. I see a few people who have not taken up their breakout room. If something happened and you didn't get assigned and you want to be, please let me know. Setting a timer. I'm assigning everyone to a breakout room, even if you just walked into this entire seminar and you don't know what we're doing. You don't have to take up the breakout room right now. Yeah, and staying without joining a room is totally okay. All right. Richard or Dane, did you see what our total number was?
We were at about 255 at one point.
Awesome, thank you. That's been 2 minutes, about 3 more minutes. And to get full value out of the session, if you happen to not have gone to a room and you have questions and you can access the chat, I'll answer anything that comes through. If you're just getting here, you're probably seeing that lots of people are in breakout rooms. I will happily assign you to a room, but feel free to either go there if that's right for you, or just stay here and wait for them to come back and talk. Oh, I got to make a note of this question now. One more room. And sorry, Richard and Dane, one more question for you. People can elect to turn their microphone on, right? Or do I need to do that for them?
Looks like that was disabled.
Okay.
Yeah, so as of now, you would need to do it.
Great. Let's see how I do that.
So I just changed the settings so participants can unmute themselves.
Beautiful.
Is that what you would prefer?
Yes.
Awesome.
We'll get a nice collection of baby and car noise, and that's okay too.
Absolutely.
I'm going to pull people back here, so everybody should come back in about a minute or so. Which means I can restart the share. Oh, I'm already sharing. Great. People have been looking at my desktop. And Dane, would you please, if you don't mind grabbing that file, if you can reshare it one more time once everybody gets back.
Sure. Yep, I can do that.
I'll be song and dancing. Okay, we're almost all back, and we will talk about this one. I think people have about 10 more seconds. There's our group. Excellent. There's always a little joy in my heart when I see that people take the full minute in their rooms, because that means that they were hopefully talking about things. What I'd love to do is have a couple of volunteers. You can raise your little blue hand, and then we'll be able to get you to speak up here. First off, why does this model predict that cyber tests might even make outcomes worse?
Okay, I'll throw in.
Please do.
Our group talked about the fact that it takes away the humanity. It assumes that you aren't trustworthy. It makes you want to not follow the test. You have no identity because it's being taken away by a machine. Yeah, so I think a lot of people would just either not want to use it or try to find a way around it. And there are already, we talk about the fact that there's already a Reddit thread on how to fool these kinds of things, because, you know, just like gamers, as soon as you put a problem in front of them, they're going to go out and find a way to get around it. The ones that will, and that's pretty much it.
That was beautifully said. I'm going to pick out a couple of things and say them into a camera so I sound just as smart. You talked about different ways that people get to feeling about something like cyber test, and you center around humanity. Like cyber test is talking about a very discrete engineering problem of we need to stop people from being able to do this on their computers, but it changes the human relationship between them and their instructor, and that's already stressed in an online environment. So that might make their decisions even worse. That emotional connection is harder to get to. Thank you for that. You also noted that when you hand students a hard challenge, students often respond by saying, let's attack that challenge. And that is exactly what we want in assessment. We just would like to focus that on medieval poetry and not how do you beat this software. I'll take a volunteer here. On number 2, why does this model predict that we will never stop all cheating?
We really quickly just said, because where there's a will, there's a way. Students will just find a way because it depends on the motivation for cheating in the first place. And
when you say where there's a will, there's a way, it sounds like you're treating your students as they have different wills for things.
I don't know if treating them that way, but just thinking that for those that are finding that that's the only way around the problem, they usually will find ways to get that done, if that makes any sense.
Yes,
more of the, if that's what we think we know, that is the way, then you find a way.
Yeah, and it's just to add on what you're saying, we're handing them this one size fits all, but each of their environments is different. And so a student who has a ton of pressure on their competitive outlook, we're handing them the same assessment as somebody it's really all about fear, or it's really all about identity. And if we're going to humanize students and ask for great things from them, it's hard to do that in a one-size-fits-all model. Somebody is going to have an environment where cheating may be a totally rational response. We don't have to like it. In fact, downright hate it. But it's still going to be there at some level. Okay, thank you for everybody who not only chimed in, but also volunteered to. We'll keep going now that I've given you my test. And I want to talk about how do we reduce some of the gravity of these bad pathways. If there's all these other places students can go, how can we decrease that pull? And the way to do that is to reduce the non-curriculum barriers in the assessment. And every assessment has barriers for students. We would like to make a larger proportion of those be actually understanding the content. Here are 10 different ways to do that. So these are our 5 barriers over here on the side. And what I'm going to show you are ways to reduce the non-curriculum barriers, first in your communication, and then in the format of your exam or assessment or project or whatever it is that you give in your classes. I'm going to give you 10 different suggestions. I guarantee you somebody on this call is going to look at every one of those and say, for me, number 4 is totally irrelevant and cannot be possible. But maybe number 8 would work, and maybe number 9 could be adjusted for your scenario. And my job is to hopefully give you enough choices that you can pick what might work for you. I'm going to present these 10 options. I'm going to throw you in a breakout room to talk about it for 4 or 5 minutes while you read, give you a chance to first maybe ping pong some ideas off of people, and then I'm going to pull you back for a discussion. Okay, so here are the 10 options that I'm giving you. This is not exhaustive. I'm going to throw you back into the same breakout rooms, and then we're going to talk about them in 5 minutes. Feel free to stay and ask questions. Feel free to not join the rooms if it's better for you not to. All right, and it looks like people are joining the rooms now. Great. If you happen to enter a room that doesn't have anybody else who's talking, just come on back, I'll assign you somewhere else. Yeah, Tammy, 1 second. Oh, interesting. Tammy, I don't see your name in my list of unassigned. Sometimes it hides down in the bottom along your Zoom, and it might be in the 3-dot menu. Let me keep seeing if I can find you. If you do find it, just go ahead and hit it. If not, I might be out of luck because there might just be too many people to find you. Oh yeah, you should be able to find it.
Could you assign me some, other room?
Yeah, I can't see who you are. Can you just go ahead and check?
So I'm sorry, but in our group we couldn't. Sorry. Whenever you're ready, I'll ask you.
Go for it.
So when I joined my breakout room, we couldn't see the 10 things to work with.
Yeah.
Right.
So those are in the notes files. Let me put that up for you. That notes file is right here. It's in the chat now, and you can jump back in your room with it if you like.
Thank you. Now I wish I could do that. So you will probably need to assign me again, room 23.
No problem.
Thanks.
And Dr. San, did that send you to the right spot? Oh, I think it did. Very good. About one
I'm
more
online
minute.
from my cell phone, so I don't see, any notes file. So could you do, paste the link to this document?
Yes. What's the easiest way to do that? Dane, do you have a place that you can throw this PDF somewhere and send out the link?
Yeah, we can get it out.
That'd be awesome. It may take us a few minutes, but we will definitely do that. Okay, I'm going to call people back. All right, people are heading back now. And I'm going to share my screen again. We're about half back. Great, about 10 more seconds. Excellent. Welcome back. What I'd love to do is take a few volunteers to share if there was anything that seemed like it might fit for your class and why, or anything that you were confused about. I'll take either one. Professor Jasmine Cohen, do you want to start us out?
So I was in group 27.
Mm-hmm.
We had three people in there who are involved with teacher education.
Mm-hmm.
So our teacher candidates are very much focused on if everyone else cheats, then I will fall behind or I don't look as good. And I need to have a certain grade point average in order to be recommended for certification.
Mm-hmm.
And then what do you do in order to counteract that? Because all of our teacher candidates in the end will have to take an exam by whatever state it is to show that they know the content knowledge.
Yeah.
And so
that's a great question.
So then that becomes very, very difficult. This is cosmetic changes. We said what we do is we give multiple points of entry with various redos. Because the learning takes space between the submission and then the feedback, reflecting on the feedback, and then resubmitting it.
Mm-hmm.
And none of us really like the cheating software that much because I don't want to be the police. I am not.
Let me jump in here and just give you a couple of a couple of things that I would want to push you towards. Cosmetic changes help for some audiences of students as a real or perceived real signal that you care about cheating, enough to put, there are multiple versions on this exam, even if there aren't. Enough to say, to describe your anti-cheating measures and why you are doing that. So those are, the describing anti-cheating measures is not something you're doing to scare people off of cheating. They're probably cheating because their rational assessment of their system, of their life, is that that is a good thing for them. But what you want to remind everybody else to do is to understand that the outcomes, the really negative outcomes for students who cheat, you're not going to hear about them, right? When students are sent to academic misconduct and are kicked out of school, that's not a signal you're going to receive. So you can remind your students that does happen. There are real costs to them. Those students will be met in their careers by ethical challenges. They will be met by content challenges that if they have chosen to cheat previously, they are going to fail just later. And those kind of reminders for students, when they come from your actual words, can really matter. The cosmetic changes help to bring those home because it's not just something you're saying, it's also something you're doing. Thank you, Dr. Cohen. That was a really good question. And Laura Alexander, do you want to jump in?
Hi, thank you. I hope that I will properly represent my group here, but we talked about largely two things. One is the idea of communicating to the students that unless you're grading on a curve, your grade is going to be your own. It doesn't matter if every other student in the class cheats and makes an A. Your grade is still your own. You're in control of that, so that they hopefully let go of this idea that somehow other people doing better means that I have to do worse.
Yeah.
So that was the thing we talked about there.
Awesome. If I was coaching you, the thing I would ask you to add is, since you are already doing all the work to allow everybody to have their own independent grade, which means you've taken on extra effort to do that, make that obvious to your students. You can tell them, look, it takes me 20 more hours over the course of this semester to make it so that your grades are independent. I do that because I care that you can succeed. Those hours are hidden from students unless you really spell them out. And professionally, we don't like to complain about how much time we put in, but students have no way to access that information. They don't know they don't know if you spend 5 minutes a day on teaching or 15 hours a day on teaching, and you can really be helpful for them by laying those things out. So I'm really glad you talked about that one, and I think that's a way to bring it home for students. There are too many things here to discuss deeply, although there are lots of options. But one option that brings a lot of these home is to provide part of the exam ahead of time. When you do that, you allow students to spread out processing in a way that's much more cohesive or much more aligned with their careers. Very few of us are going to get into a job and then have to come up with content knowledge on the spot. That's just not a thing that we often do. As a molecular biologist, nobody ever asks anyone else, do you remember the name of that protein? And then expects the perfect answer in that second. What they really want is, hey, can you figure out how this thing works? I'll give you a few days. Or can you give us an explanation of the model in 15 minutes and be more or less there? It can also help with, if you have messaging on your exam, if you want to tell students, hey, I really think you can do this. I'm giving you challenges because I believe in you. They don't have any time to read that unless you give them part of the exam ahead of time. If what you want them to do is to practice the kinds of skills that you're testing on your assessment, they're going to do more practice if they know that's going to directly apply to the exam. So if you can take some piece, some data or an idea or a scenario and throw that into your exam ahead of time, that can actually reduce a lot of the barriers that students feel, especially in timed exams, especially when the language is really pressing for students from lots of different language backgrounds, especially when students have different issues of access. Time heals a lot when it comes to exam format. Okay, I'm gonna move forward because what I think we've done and I will pause for questions here in a little bit. What I think we've done is we've spent a lot of time talking about reducing the non-curriculum barriers to success. But I want to add in the second piece, which is giving assessments that are aligned to their life skills and to their career relevant skills. Really upping the level of assessments so that students feel that the assessment is part of their real world. One way that I have liked to illustrate this in the past is to use Neil. Neil may tell us to think creatively and to be expansive and to be big picture and ask important questions. But if Neil was a professor and telling us these high-minded things, but at the same time giving assessments that gave a very different viewpoint, now students are seeing Neil say, be creative, but also this huge banner telling them you will be punished for creative thought. Too often, our courses and the courses around us are doing this whether we know it or not. We're saying, we want this thing from you. We want these good pieces of your brain to be working, but also you've got to memorize a bunch of facts, and if you don't, you're done for. What we really need to do is we need to put into practice the same kinds of things that we say. So if we think synthesis is an important topic, let's make the exam format really reflect that. You get two kinds of communication with your students when it comes to any assessment. And if they say the same thing, that's a powerful message. Because so many of our colleagues do not do this, they talk about what they want from students, but in actuality, their exams are very different. It doesn't take a lot of synthesis between your two voices to really come home to students and saying, of my 5 classes, this is the one that I understand. Yeah. Oh, okay. So I'm going to grab this question just because it's exactly what I want to talk about. What do you do about students who have 20 credits, they're working 15 or 20 hours on the side, and they just have to put their time into so many places? What do you do to get their attention on your course? This is a competitive ecology. You're competing with 4 other professors. How do you get them to focus on your field? I think the way is to give them more relevant, more interesting challenges. So when they go,
organizers.
I need to work on this test. I need to work on this test. I need to work on, oh, but that test is really interesting. Maybe I'll work on it while I'm driving to my job. Maybe I'll put more time into it at night. I'll stay up a little bit longer focusing on that. You can beat other professors to the punch by giving them more interesting comments or more interesting assessments. So here's some examples that I want to throw at you. And you do not need to have a biology or genetics background to understand this. I could ask students, tell me about the genetic control in bacterial systems. That's a relevant question. It's important for many courses. And if I do that, it's both topical and it's gradable. I can give this as a multiple choice question. So I get dots. What this question is not, is it's not difficult. Now, it might be difficult in light of having 50 other questions on the exam, but it in itself is not a difficult concept. It's also not career relevant. Probably nobody is going into a job where they need to express that particular piece of information and get paid for it. And it doesn't provoke any thought. So I want to take the same concept and I want to deepen it. And I'm going to try to, I'm cheating the system. I want to grab more of their attention by more interesting challenges. So I could, let's see, I could have them explain the model. Well, it's still topical, still gradable. Explaining is a little bit more thought-provoking, but as you can probably expect from all the white space, we're going to go deeper. So I could ask them for an example of positive control, which is one different kind of control, and I want them to draw it. Now they're going to have to really understand their own understanding. They're going to have to come up with different ways to assess it, or different ways to show on the assessment rather than what I have taught them in class. So now it's a little bit more difficult. Now it's a little bit more career relevant. Drawing may not be all that thought-provoking on a grand scale, but I keep the topical and the gradableness. Okay, how about this one? I'm going to give them a new model. So here is gene G in a diagram where it's exerting genetic control on circ C. If you don't know anything about biology and genetics, that's fine, because this thing doesn't exist. I made it up. But it uses some of the same principles of how genes are transcribed and translated and impact each other. I'm giving them a scenario where they can then work into a new system and give me specifics. Oh, I figured this thing out. I redrew it for myself and I tried to understand, what is gene G actually doing? What does gene Y mean? What are the preconceived notions that I'm bringing to this that maybe I can break down? And now I'm starting to do things that are difficult, that are career relevant, that are thought-provoking, even if they're not real or memorized out of a textbook. And then, as I alluded to before, I want to go a little bit farther. And now I'm going to say, here's a new genetic diagram. In a week, I'm going to ask you to explain some part of its function. Think about this, work with others to study, try out your own questions on each other. But now I think I'm getting to something that's topical and gradable and difficult and career relevant and thought-provoking. Somebody in the comments just said a bad or a wrong or impossible example can be a really good start of discussion. And what I truly care about is that when students sit down and study with each other, that they're doing science things, they're doing biology things, or if you're teaching linguistics, that they are doing linguistics things. If you're teaching nursing, they're doing nursing things. And that's what I really want to catalyze as much as I can. Let's do this. That's a lot of biology. Let's do something that has nothing to do with the biology you would see in a molecular biology class. So here's a set of examples from coursework on building land acknowledgements. So acknowledging the land, especially in the United States or North America, is being used by people who didn't develop it, who weren't taking care of and stewarding that land for thousands of years. Well, here's 5 different examples of ways that you could assess a student's knowledge of how to write a land acknowledgement. And I've got a bunch of dots for you. Take about 20 or 30 seconds, read through these examples, and see if you get where I'm going as we get deeper and deeper into the topic. I will be quiet for 30 seconds. And Christy, will you please make sure I answer your question that you put in the chat if I don't do it in the next minute or so? Okay. So what I've shown you are 5 different ways to think about land acknowledgements, one of which is a multiple choice question. And I think we'll all agree that if you're going to write a heartfelt piece of important communication, probably a multiple choice question is rarely going to get there, although it is very gradable. So a few things about these different options. So they could write a land acknowledgement for a situation in which many of them do not live. They could evaluate 2 different land acknowledgements for people in their city and try to figure out why we would want to use one or the other. They could make edits, or they could write it themselves and connect it in a new way. For all of these different options, all of the content knowledge is maintained. For many people who are writing assessments and haven't thought about this for as many years, you might think, well, I'm going to need 5 or 6 multiple choice questions and then the writing question. But we have really good research at this point that shows that the higher level kinds of thinking contain all of the same content knowledge. It has to be there. So you don't have to test both to know whether they know the content knowledge. Any of these bottom 4 you could pre-release part of this question and just ask them the most relevant piece or the final piece on the actual exam when they come into the room, or they come into their timed exam part. Really what we're doing with these last 3 or 4 choices is we are not deciding should students do something worthwhile or not. We're choosing which kind of worthwhile challenge do we want them to take. And if nothing else, that's what I want out of more of our exams, is that we're asking students to do some worthwhile challenge and you be the person that judge which are the most worthwhile challenges. And then lastly for my list, this exam can be a vehicle for new content. You might not have done this new thing until the exam, but you might choose part of your exam as the place where you're going to introduce a new topic. That is a thing that you can do. Now, when you do that, you should grade in somewhat different ways, but you can absolutely add content on the exam and ask students to think critically about it. I want to address a few of the questions that have come in, one of which I think Christy's question initially was, how do you grade stuff like this? And one of the really beautiful advantages of pre-releasing part of the question is that you can pre-release the instructions for how to format their answer. So if what you want is for students to make 3 edits to show why a land acknowledgement was good or bad, if they walk into the room and you say, make 3 edits, you're gonna get 60 different versions of what that looks like on their piece of paper. But you can also say, in a week, I'm gonna ask you to make 3 edits about something. When you make your edit should say the line number, what it says originally, what it says now, and then why you think that change is different. It can be lined up on the paper. It can be exact in the way that's easiest for you to grade, so that instead of trying to figure out every student's writing style, you're going, they wanted to do line number 112, they wanted to change this to this, and this is why. And maybe you decide that you're really only assessing their reasons, but they're formatting everything for you. At a hands-on practical level, what we found is that TA graders, faculty graders, the format is one of the biggest reasons that things take a long time to grade. If you tell students, write a page on something, you're gonna get as many different kinds of pages as you have students. But pre-releasing parts of your exams means that you can ask for formatting that's much more exact than you could in an in-person or an online timed exam. I would be happy to share examples of that. It is a thing that has totally changed my life. Somebody mentioned that they use templates, and I happen to be a co-author on a paper about how to do templates for anatomy and physiology. If anyone is interested in that later, I love templates for getting students to really carefully format what they're working on. Lastly, in the few minutes that I have left, I do want to show you one example of pushing content forward with an exam. And what we wanted to do in an intro biology class is that we had to cover the mechanisms of cancer. That is a common thing to cover in intro molecular biology. But what we discovered as a teaching team is that our students were not thinking critically about some of the social aspects of how cancer impacts different communities. So the biological, social, and racial basis for cancer disparities is a thing that we wanted to put on the table. Well, I can't just make a new class session. I've got my 10 weeks and that's all I've got. So the exam was the only place that we could do this. Okay, let's put something on the exam to get students to critically analyze the racial disparities in cancer outcomes. So we gave them data. First page of the exam was these 2 graphs. They're analyzing cancer rates in people from different states and from different racial backgrounds, and also their proximity to the white dots in the bottom diagram, which is the proximity to Superfund pollutant sites. And what we told them is describe a real connection between the data in these figures and the increased cancer rates seen in populations of Black people. So this should link the data that they're seeing here for the first time with what they know about cancer at the molecular level. And this is our attempt to put this social issue on the table in what is otherwise a pretty cut and dry molecular biology class. If you've been listening to me for this long, first off, thank you. Second off, you know that we didn't stop there and just assume that that question was good. We also tried to reduce the barriers by making different edits. So we tried to remove words that didn't have a real definition, especially for speakers not from an English language background. Initially, words that are fuzzy can be really hard. We tried to simplify recursive clauses. Almost everything you write with the word of in the English language means that you're referring back to something, and those get complicated really quickly, especially when you wrote it and you're the only one that can edit it. We decreased the overall word count. We've got a paper coming out that shows that decreasing the word count helps for students, especially from non-traditional college backgrounds. And we tried to expand contractions. They are just more difficult for people that don't have lots and lots of comfortability and the kinds of literacy tools that other students might have. And when we did that, we got to a better question that had more impact for a greater number of students in how they learned about this topic. Okay. So here's the assessment I want to leave you with. And I'm speaking in front of 255 college professors, so I know you're not going to run off and actually write these answers, and that's fine. But what I hope that we have gotten to are some choices that might work for your class about short-term things, like just removing the words of, or changing how you speak about cheating. Some medium-term things about maybe some formatting, especially for assessments, and longer-term things you might want to try, like building different kinds of assessments, especially those that give students the material before they're actually sitting in that timed room or sitting down for your exam interval. Those are the kinds of things that will bring exams home, even for students with lots of barriers, which are exacerbated online. And then I would love for you to be able to think about increasing the challenge level and the relevance level of your assessments. When you do that, you're going to win this fight more often with different professors and with different distractions in students' lives by trying some of these examples that we did today. I have a couple other examples that we didn't get to, and they're in a slide. There's some descriptions there if you're interested in them. But I think that these are two things that we've talked about a lot. And hopefully, if I've done my job today, there are a couple of things that I've said today that you have responded to with, that's so simple. I can't believe he's taking credit for this. And I can absolutely do that. It's going to take me 5 minutes. That's what I want you to do. It's those low-hanging fruit that change more classes for more students into really visceral, personal, positive experiences. And I just hugely appreciate that you are the people who are out there doing it and guiding this next generation. Thank you so much. I will hang around for as many questions as we have. I know you have a million other things to do, but please do not be scared about contacting me. I love talking about this stuff. Thank you, everyone.
Really, really wonderful, as expected. Hopefully everyone enjoyed. I know you are running to other sessions or breaks, perhaps. Ben said he's willing to stay and answer more questions. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Ben, you're presenting again later in the afternoon?
Yeah, my time, it's 2 o'clock right now. So in 45 minutes, I'll be back up to talk about revamping course materials based on, you show up and somebody says, here's the binder, teach this class. What do you do with that binder? So if anybody's interested in that, I'll see you in an hour.
Awesome. Attending folks.
And I've included my email address in there. Some of the most fun things I've done the last couple of years have been from talking to people that I met at Course Hero. So please feel free to use that email.
Where is the email?
It's on the last slide. It's also just Ben LW. Let me throw that into the chat. There's a lot of chat going on right now, so you might not get to it, but I'm easy to find. There is a very handsome Ben Wiggins that is not me, and they are, so if you Google search me, I'm the second one.
Thank you.
First on Google Scholar, though.
Oh, awesome. I gotta keep publishing. Gotta keep ahead of them.
UW.
Thanks, everyone. If you have put questions in the last few minutes and you'd like to talk about them, please put them in one more time.
Thank you.
Madhu, you said, are there studies that tie focusing on making students understand that their grade reflects what they learn in the class, or improving the culture on academic integrity limits cheating? Oh, this is such a good question. There are very few cheating studies overall. Cheating is so hard to prove. You could, I don't know if you do any human subjects research, but if you tell human subjects that you're going to find out who cheated and somehow ask them about it, they will almost shut you down instantly, because that is, you know, a potential, like a lie, or you know, it's something that it came out later. It could affect them when they run for Senate or something like that. It is very difficult to do cheating studies. We have lots of studies of student experience. So this is K-12 level, higher education, where students talk about the reasons that they cheat or the reasons that they don't cheat. And those are almost always built around connection. I didn't cheat because I felt connected to this instructor, or I didn't cheat because I knew the instructor believed in me. Almost nobody ever says, I didn't cheat because I love accounting. It's something to do with a person. Accounting is wonderful, but it's something to do with a person and that connection. So the more you can make that connection, even though you're stuck on a screen, the more likely that the cheating that does happen in your class, and it's inevitable that there's going to be some, is necessary or is really intransigent, or is the kind of cheating you were never going to change anyway.
Yeah, so can I ask a question here? What about these, you know, honor codes and things like that, the culture of changing academic integrity? Does that really work?
Okay, so I'm going to ask you a question. When people come to me and they say, yeah, but I put an honor code, this is usually what I say. Is the honor code in the same words that you personally speak about the topic? And if it is, now it's not a connection with a piece of paper, it's a connection with you. And are the honor code words something that they have heard you say in class? When you had your choice between, you could talk about your dog, or you could talk about your class, or you could talk about these honor code words. When you had your valuable time, did you put it there? And then the third thing is, when they see those honor code words, do they already know why you think cheating is not important? Or sorry, do they already know why not cheating is important? And if they see honor code, I've seen instructors do this really well. It just says honor code, and a signature place. There is no explanatory text. But students in those classes could already tell you word for word what their instructor would say. Oh, Professor Schivel believes in me, thinks that I'm better than that, and knows that my exam scores do not reflect me as a person. Oh, I'll sign this and I'll mean it. And you'll see other times where honor code or cheating is only discussed in text on the exam in the 10 seconds before they start their 45-minute pressure-filled run through 50 multiple choice questions, and the instructors never said it. They know that that's BS, or at least they can make a reasonable assumption that that's BS. So my question for you is, if you're going to do an honor code, does it match other parts of your teaching? And if it does, I think you've got something there.
Great, thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hi. Can I ask you how we're going to get these slides of yours? They're wonderful. There's a lot on them, and I didn't quite have time to process all of them during this session.
Oh, yeah. I'm going to throw them into the chat right now. Let's see. I'm going to check. Here's the PowerPoint. Oh, we don't do PowerPoint right now. Here's the PDF of those notes. So I think you should see that in the chat now.
Already in the chat under notes for creative assessments, download.
I've already got the note links you put in a while back. Is this the same thing you're talking about now?
Oh.
Your slides, your actual slides that you showed us.
Yeah, the actual slides. Just promise me you'll only use them for good and never for evil. Shoot me an email. I'll give you anything you want.
Okay.
Okay, so we can.
How do we save this chat? Someone mentioned, how can we save this chat? So, because I didn't have time to pay attention to you and read everybody's chat. There was a lot going on there.
I posted about the chat. If you look down in the bottom of the chat list, on the right, you'll see a little file, and next to it are 3 dots. If you click on that dot, it says more first, and then you push save the chat. And what I've discovered is you can do that while you're listening to the chat, and then it won't save until the last time you save is what you get. And it goes someplace on your computer, and you'll have to go look for it. And it'll have today's Zoom number and so forth. You'll find it.
So,
Thank you so
so for me, like I wanted to go back again to the cheating.
Yeah.
When I do an opening session, even for asynchronous courses, and I go through the honors code, and then I show my teacher candidates the exam results from the last cohort that passed the content test for New York State.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a 99% pass rate.
Awesome.
Okay. I say, and those are all of the students who didn't cheat. Because they actually learned the stuff, and look, they all passed.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is really what everybody wants. Like, you know, they're not really here to be, you know, forever intricately together with me in the course. They are there for a really specific thing. They need to pass the New York State content exam. And if they take our courses, 99% of them pass.
Can I problematize this for you? My job is to make your life harder and make you think about things. So let me just push this out towards you. It sounds like you already have a very personal, focused way that you address cheating in your class. If you ask me for how could I make this better, I think the one thing you could try is you said that you do that in your first session. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make a huge assumption that several sessions down the road, you and your students have a deeper relationship, a more meaningful relationship. And that maybe that discussion should come after some of that relationship has been established. It may mean more if you push it back a little bit, if you push it closer to the time of an exam. I do not know that that is true for sure. But if you're asking for how to take your good system and maybe push it to great, that would be my first suggestion.
The hardest part of that is the asynchronous part of our online learning. And that's also been my biggest concern, which sort of untethers the bonds of our relationship with the students altogether, if that makes sense.
So I have another question for you. You're working with teacher candidates. Are there, in your teaching, do you discuss any other ethical dilemmas?
Well, we discussed the regulations for our teaching English as a second language, the intake test for our minority students. And so, yes, we do discuss a lot of ethical considerations.
That's fantastic. And I think that is also, it sounds like that's a thread for you, not surprising in teacher education with so many ethical considerations that are happening on a second-to-second basis. That is also a thread that I think you can tap into as like, look, cheating on what we're doing is not necessarily going to make you do well or poorly with this ethical consideration you have to make with this one student, but it is good practice for some of the same muscles. And that might be another way of getting your particular cohort of students to that particular realization. If you thought that cheating with that group was a serious concern.
It's a very good insight. That's very valid what you just said. Thank you.
I'm in the library science. May I say something, please? May I say something?
Yes, please.
I heard the keyword here is ethical considerations. And I just wrote something on the chat, and I said cheating is going to stay. It's not going to vanish, that's for sure. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering if we can focus more on trust and honesty, because after all, I heard somebody earlier saying that we are not going to police there. We are not going to act as policemen or policewomen. Mm-hmm. The thing is, our mission probably is to give information, to teach our students. And probably we have to leave it up to them if they want to be trustworthy and honest, and forget about cheating, because cheating, no matter what you do, you are going to suffer with your students if you try to control cheating.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell me what field you work in?
Technical communication.
Say it one more time.
Technical communication and
Yeah.
global communication.
Mm-hmm. And can you think of an example for me? I am sure you can think of lots, but can you think of an example for me of a way in which trust and honesty matter for people who do technical and global communication? Like,
Okay.
how did it change their life or change their performance?
Because of this phenomenon, which is cheating, I always try to focus more on project-based assignments, where students have to work in groups, and the outcome is in no way is going to be based on cheating. It is more about conducting a research, collecting data, and distributing the information among the group members before they come and present it in front of the class and so on. So this is basically why. It doesn't mean that I'm not giving the quizzes. I do give quizzes. Most of them are online quizzes, and I understand the chances to resort to internet are high. But honestly, I don't care if students cheat, because I always tell them at the beginning of the semester that I use two things: trust and honesty. Because in those courses I'm teaching, my very first weeks, we focus, because and by the way, I'm glad that you mentioned the ethical considerations. The first weeks, we focus a lot on ethics and ethical considerations.
That's awesome. I mean, that's great to hear. This is good ideas for me as well. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Dwight, I think you had your hand raised here.
Yeah. So I have a question in terms of how you changed or did not change your assessments in moving them from the face-to-face classroom to the online environment. Particularly, so for example, the question that you had about the gene expression, the gene control question, right? So that question, I can definitely see how that would play in, you know, a face-to-face environment. Does it change any at all in the online space if your classes run asynchronously?
Yeah, this is a great question. I'm going to bring a lot of my own assumptions to this. Like in intro molecular biology, one of the assumptions is that I have very specific grade medians that I am regulated by the university. I don't have a choice. My average grade has to be 2.7. That's a brutal grade to give to people who are already, you know, doing well in college and those kind of things. But so your assumptions may be very different. One of the things that I did with my class this summer is in the first week, I gave a quiz in the first week. And part of that quiz was, how do we as a class want to work on quizzes? Do we want to work on them solely and accept the fact that some people are going to cheat and a few people are going to get away with it? Do we want to work on things in groups and you tell me who your group is? And so you're tied together by grade. So if your group submits, you can submit individually or you can submit it as a group, but if your group submits something that's a poor score, you get a poor score as well. And so I gave them a few options there. And students came back, and for this particular course, there were 50 in it, and they were really overwhelmingly said, look, we want to be able to work in groups, but we want to have individual scores. Okay, then that means that that's already guiding the kinds of questions that I can ask. So I can ask really difficult questions. I can expect them to work together. I can expect to have a longer open window to give people time to meet up and work on questions. But then when I get back, I can expect to be really high quality. So I don't have to grade for like, did you know the little stuff or did you know the easy stuff? I can go right to the heart of a question because I know they've had a chance to talk with other people and they've had those kinds of opportunities. Does that get to your real question, is how do things change when they go online? I think my example is getting to the idea that if students have a little bit of a voice on what their options are, that's an opportunity for me to go in a direction the class would have gone, which is different than I would have by myself. But it's also an opportunity for me to present some of the counterpoints. Like I can say, if people have individual scores and it's a timed class, you get the downside if you have that pressure, but also it's harder for people to cheat. Or if you do group work, you now have to accept the fact that everybody is doing group work. So you might not be in the perfect group. And competitive students do worry about those things. So Dwight, I don't think that, I know that definitely doesn't address all the parts of your question, but does that start to think about some of the issues you were wondering about?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Janice, you've got your hand up. Is it okay to?
Yes, this has been a great session. I would like to explore more this idea of changing the assignments to minimize cheating so that it is more problem-based or based than, based on some assessments, so that whether that's individually or whether that's working in groups. And then the other question that I have, as we are preparing teachers to go and work with children, I would appeal to their better angels in that they don't want to model that kind of dishonest behavior that they would be working with. I don't know exactly how to explain that, but as I work with my students, I talk to them about when they work with their students, the ethical use of information, proper attribution, recognizing that there's intellectual property rights. And, I actually work with my students because they're going to be in the field working with students and should be supporting those kinds of ideas as they work with their students. But I'm particularly interested in the idea of changing the assignments because I try to encourage my students to change their assignments that would not lend themselves so well to cheating.
So I'm glad that you brought up better angels because I want to talk a little bit about the worse angels. If you have students for whom some of the access to them is only based on their own profit or their own benefit, one of the ways to get them thinking about deeper assignments is to include, if you can do a few deeper, more relevant assignments, you can toss a bunch of stuff that's just grading or not as high level. So if you have little quizzes that are just for information, maybe you have to grade 3 of those quizzes for the same benefit that you get for one deeper writing assignment. And there are some people, I think that most of the people going into education are really doing it for this better angel standpoint, but there's people who are going to end up in education as well. And they can be convinced sometimes by saying, look, you can do less of these other things and give your students more time to focus on the important stuff, have less assignments that you have to create and grade, and that can sometimes be persuasive. That is a little bit of aside from your main question, which is thinking more about how do we get people, I think what you're saying is how do we get people to model the kinds of behavior that they want out of people in their field?
Yes.
I feel like you and I are going to get along, but also we talk about education, so we're doing modeling all the time. Let's say we're talking about financial law. The modeling in financial law may be more based around a concept of intensely organized thought. Okay, so that's a different paradigm. It's not ethical, it's not connection. So if it's intensely organized thought, maybe the first part of the assessment in financial law is, what I need to see is when you walk into the room, you hand in the first part of your assessment, which is you need to intensely organize the last 2 weeks of our class. And that's the same kind of modeling where you're talking about modeling for teachers, the kind of ethical interpersonal behavior and putting that into the context of your exam. For financial law, maybe they have a different set of ethics that they really need to impart on their trainees. And so building that into the assessment system. For education specifically, I personally think that the more that the assessments make people think, and for education, the more that the assessments are open so that trainees are seeing why we are asking these questions, they're getting training even if it doesn't come onto the exam.
Yes.
So my guess is you are probably pretty transparent about why you test what you test.
Yes, exactly.
And that's so beautiful for education. Not that it's not for any other field, but for education, you are allowing them that window into like, why did my heart put this question on and not this other thing?
Mm-hmm.
So they can make questions for their own students or questions for themselves, kind of in that same mode.
Thank you. That was helpful.
Awesome. Thank you. Let's see. I don't see other hands up. I'm scanning the chat right now. Aha! Rosemary, thank you. That is a beautiful one. Rosemary said, creating questions can be the task of the students. So if anybody has read the Course Hero article I wrote about how I do my public exams, part of the assignment is that students have to write an exam question, which, especially in large classes, gives me hundreds of choices to put into the exam. I rarely actually use them, but they're always there if I want them. And I get two benefits from that, I think. And one is that students are coming at the material in a different way because they're trying to be creative about it or trying to be more generative. But the other thing that I'm getting is that we're breaking down the authority in the room. It is very easy for me to stand up as a middle-aged white male who, coming from a kind of a hetero-able background and stand there in front of a class and just tell them what the test should be. But when students are co-creating that exam or they feel involved in the creation of that exam, it breaks down a little bit of that power structure. And hopefully it's less of me in front of the video and more them connecting with the material without always needing a white guy as the go-between. So Rosemary, thank you for that idea. That's a great thing to add in there. I think I have a few more minutes here. It is so awesome that so many people have stayed here or have just left your Zoom on to make me feel good. Either way, it's totally fine.
I have a couple of comments about cheating in general.
Please do.
So one, another faculty member once said to me that we were talking when we were on a committee meeting last summer, and she said that she just put her test on Blackboard and stopped worrying about cheating, and she noticed that there was not a difference in grade distribution, so that that didn't happen. The other thing that I've done, so the way I test is I do this team-based learning thing where students take their test individually, then they take the same test with their team. So one of the neat things is when I put them in groups, I go into Blackboard groups, I can listen to them for a while, and I go between groups. And so I hear them, and one time I heard a student clearly reading a definition, not in their own words. So I'm like, okay, they must be reading it from somewhere. But then as they were discussing it, they couldn't apply it correctly. So even though they, quote, cheated to, quote, get what they thought the right answer, they got the answer wrong. The final part of our thing about that is that on any item on the test, the team can challenge it. And the way that they challenge it is if, one, they thought the question was too ambiguous where there could be more than one answer, or if it disagreed with the readings, they can rewrite the question to make it more clear or less ambiguous. And it is listening to them talk about that and go through that discussion makes it so much stronger. And hearing them, as I thought about it, they're doing what we want them to do. They're discussing the material. They're getting into it. That's what we really want more than anything.
Oh, I love it. What field are you working in?
Psychology.
Okay, yeah. I have found that probably once a year I'll get a student coming to me and they'll come into my office in the same way. They'll kind of sheepishly edge in, Professor, I was in this group and we've been looking at your examples in class and we started making our own examples and putting them on the board and trying questions. And I don't know how to say this, but on your last exam, we already guessed one of the questions and we all got the question right because we had a really good description of it. Do we need to go to community conduct and tell them we cheated? And it's exactly what you're saying, like, no, you just did it. That's exactly, if you didn't do anything else for the rest of your college career, if you just practice the kinds of things that we're trying to do in each of your courses, oh, it's wonderful. And we as assessors can get out of our own way by building opportunities for them to do that. Because your average first year student, I don't care where they are, probably doesn't walk into the room knowing that. And even if they do, the students who were at their dinner table growing up with two parents who, normatively two parents who were both college educated and had that advantage of talking in those kinds of ways, there's lots of people coming to college from different communities that we need to put into a position of power. And that only happens if they see some of these rules. And I think what you're talking about is students seeing the rules and then realizing like, oh, if those are the rules, then I should just work in this way. Ah, that's just wonderful.
Yeah.
Can I want to talk to you for about 2 hours about psychology. We can't do that now. Thank you for that.
Oh, certainly.
Mark, you've had your hand up for a little bit.
When you're talking about students making up questions, I posted this in the chat. I gave the opportunity for students to make up a question. Everybody had to make up a question for the test, and I said I'd take the questions from there. This was a first year technology course that I teach at Bentley University. And so everybody, the interesting thing was that the interviews as a study tool, the person who put in the first question still had to read the rest of them, and the person who posted the last question had to read all the previous ones so they didn't repeat any. But what happened was everybody got the same question wrong on the quiz because somebody posted the wrong answer in the document, and nobody questioned that what the students posted was incorrect. So everybody studied that, which was great. I saw they studied it, but it struck me that nobody questioned the wrong, that they assumed that if their classmates posted it, it must have been right. So it just turned into a teachable moment on information that you can and can't trust online as well.
Yeah, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm guessing since you teach technology that you can think of at least a few examples where the global insight on how a technology was going to work turned out to be completely incorrect and wasn't based in any data. And so it's both an example for what you can believe personally, but it's also like, look, when you go into a technology space, there are going to be some norms and some beliefs that people have that they don't have for any good reason. Even people with fancy degrees are going to sit there in a boardroom and say, oh, yeah, everybody's going to love glasses that you can see your email on. Well, yeah, until you actually test the thing.
Yeah, we don't have to talk about that, but you're right. Some things are not meant to work. But, no, you're exactly right, and this has been a great session, so thank you. And I love having students make up questions and do my work for me.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. I have a couple more minutes. Let's see. Oh man, this is the most fun part of my week. Anna, did you have a thought?
There we go. Yeah, I'm curious how you give your students room to fail in a course. I mean, we talk about, they're just learning the answers and plugging them in, but actually giving them room to fail. Use any kind of pretest and then retest. I have used pretests, or I do in one of my courses, and I always find it interesting that the grades don't change that much from the pretest to the retest.
I will just echo what you said in that the single most important determiner of where the distribution of exam grade sits is how we grade it, not how much time they had, not what challenge. I had an instructor once who said, oh, all my students always do well. My average is always above 75%. And I sat in on a grading meeting, and this instructor had 10 TAs working and went around individually to each TA and said, just make sure that the average grade gets about 8 out of 10 points. I was like, look, you just guaranteed that. That wasn't natural from student experience, but that's an aside. You asked for, how do you, see if I can put this into words. Sorry, will you give me the core of the question one more time?
Giving students room to fail.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to throw 3 different ways that I do this at you. Use them for what they're worth. One is I try to increase the number of times that I'm assessing students. So if I have a 10-week course, that course used to be just a final exam. when somebody else was teaching it. And then it became a final and a midterm. And I've gone to 5 exams and I love it. I will never go back. If I could squeeze a 6th and a 7th in, I would do it. The first exam of my 5, I have lots of students being like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to deal with 5 of these high pressure exams. And on the second one, they realize like, oh, this is only 20% of my grade on the exam part. Oh, the third one, they've started to really critically assess how much time is worth to put into this small part of their lives. That creates more opportunities for them to have a bad day and not have it be the entire semester. That's one. Number 2 is I'm very vocal and repeatedly vocal about saying that I do not think that your exam score has anything to do with your potential in the future. I can do that just by saying it. I can do it by really looking like I mean it, because I mean, I really do, but also there's some character acting that goes into that to really bring that across in an auditorium. And part of that is that I have examples of students who have failed scores. They have had a really bad exam score or a really bad class score and gone on to do incredible things. And I add into those stories students who have had really bad exam scores or repeated really bad scores in classes and then gone on to do just fine. Because I want them to realize that they can be spectacular, but also you don't have to be spectacular to get where you need to go. And for my students who are thinking about like, our family put so much into this college education, I need to get a certain amount of career out of it or I'm letting them down. Also giving some stories about people who have done fine really helps that particular cohort of students. So lots of opportunities, stories for me about why I don't think their exam score matches themselves as a person. And then for molecular biology, I try to make a point of the kinds of skills that they're going to need in their career and show that if there's these 5 big things you need to do, this is what we're testing. So we're not talking at all about your long-term ability to think about research questions. We're not talking at all about how you talk with patients. We're not talking at all about how you conceptualize molecular biology with other fields involved. And that you can fail a couple of these completely. Maybe you're just terrible at school. And I have had students that I have literally talked to them in individual meetings say, look, you and I both know you're terrible at school. But if you get out, you have these strengths that are going to make you so valuable. And I think implying that there are other values that don't come across on any kind of assessment can really help students. I just gave you a whole bunch of soft stuff, right? Like this is all soft skill human stuff, and that can be terrifying because you're not assessed on that as a faculty member very often at all. And many of us have spent years and years training on something else, and now we're being asked to be a personal coach and kind of a rapid fire personal coach. But I really think though that the empathy and the expression can be learned, and it's sometimes best learned by people that don't do it naturally. That I think even for people who would think of that as something that they don't do well, I would push back and say, if you don't do it well, it's because you don't do it well yet. But these are things that humans learn really well.
Thanks.
Does that help at all?
Yeah, that gives ideas.
Okay, awesome. I apologize. I should head over and get ready for my next one, even though I'm not leaving this actual physical space. I should not talk for a few minutes. So for everybody who's still here, thank you so much for sticking all the way to the end. Thank you everyone for your questions. I'm gonna put my email address in the chat one more time. And if you have thoughts or you would like resources or you want me to point in different directions, I would love to be as helpful as I can. Thank you all very much.